You have probably heard this story wrong. 3 men. Radioactive water. Reactor 4 at Chernobyl. And a mission the internet says saved 50 million lives. But the real story is not that simple. The numbers became legend. The deaths were misreported. And the men themselves were not movie heroes walking into a scripted sacrifice. They were plant workers facing a problem almost no one fully understood. The question is not whether the myth is perfect. The question is why the mission was necessary. After the explosion, Reactor 4 was no longer a normal building. The core was destroyed. Fires burned. Radioactive material had been thrown into the air. And below the damaged reactor, water had collected in the lower rooms and bubbler pools. At first, water sounded like a solution. Firefighters had used it against the disaster above. But under the reactor, water created a different fear. Hot reactor material was believed to be moving downward. If it reached the water below, the next danger would not look like the first explosion. It would be pressure. This was not a nuclear bomb waiting to happen. That is the first correction. The feared threat was a steam pressure event. Hot material, water, confined space. When water flashes into steam, it expands violently. Inside a damaged reactor building, that possibility was terrifying. Later retellings attached enormous numbers to the danger. Millions saved, Europe destroyed. But the safest way to tell this story is simpler. The water was real. And someone had to drain it. The men chosen for the task were not random volunteers from the street. Oleksiy Ananenko knew the layout and the valves. Valeriy Bespalov was an engineer. Borys Baranov was a shift supervisor at the plant. They understood the language of pipes, rooms, and systems. That matters. Because this was not a heroic sprint into darkness. It was a technical job inside a destroyed nuclear facility. They needed to enter the flooded lower area, find the correct route, locate the valves, and open them by hand. In the story people remember, this is where the suicide mission begins. In reality, this is where the work begins. The lower corridors were dark, wet, and dangerous. The popular version often describes the men as divers. Some later accounts describe the water as much shallower than that image suggests. But the correction does not make the mission safe. They were still moving through a flooded area beneath a destroyed reactor. They still needed dosimeters. They still needed protection. And they still had to find the right valves in a maze of pipes and concrete. This is the part the myth almost gets right. Not because it was cinematic, because it was controlled fear. Inside that basement, the mission came down to orientation. Wrong pipe, wrong valve, wrong turn. And the whole operation could fail. The men followed the system they knew, moving through water and darkness until the route made sense. When the searchlight found the pipe leading toward the valves, that was the moment of relief. They opened the valves. The water began to drain. And then came the part the internet often leaves out. They came back out alive. The mission had worked. For years, the story was repeated in a darker form. The 3 men went in. They saved millions. Then they died from radiation within days. That version is powerful. It is also not the documented ending. Ananenko and Bespalov survived. Baranov lived for years after the disaster and died in 2005. The later record is less dramatic than the legend, but it is not less important. Sometimes the truth makes heroism smaller in scale and sharper in focus. They did not need to die for the mission to matter. So, what did they actually save? No honest version can prove the exact number. Not 50 million. Not Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. Those are the kinds of numbers legends attach to fear. What we can say is narrower and stronger. At a moment when Reactor 4 had already become a catastrophe, 3 plant workers helped reduce the risk of another one. They entered a dangerous place. They opened the valves. They came back. The legend exaggerated the numbers, but it did not invent the courage.